My wife banned me from her dad's retirement party. Then her dad's partner revealed her cheating truth. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been told I'm hard to read. That's what people say when you don't wear your ambition on your sleeve, when you speak with caution and listen more than you talk. In my case, it was intentional. I learned early on that silence, when wielded properly, is not a weakness. It's a weapon. Still, even with everything I've built, I never quite expected to hear the words that came out of my wife's mouth 2 nights before her father's retirement party. "Marcus," she said, not looking up from her compact mirror as she adjusted her lipstick. "Please don't embarrass us." I was leaning against the doorway of our bedroom, dress shirt still unbuttoned, watching her touch up her makeup as though she were prepping for a film premiere and not a family celebration. I wasn't sure what startled me more, how casually she said it, or the fact that she didn't even pause to see if the sentence had hit its mark. "I embarrass you?" I asked, my voice even, but my hands were cold. I could already feel the familiar knot tighten in my chest. Vivian snapped the compact shut and finally looked at me. Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. "You're a good man, Marcus. You are. But you don't belong in that world. Not theirs. Not tonight. That world. Her world. The polished upper-crust cocktail circuit of Boston's elite. The CEOs and surgeons, the venture capitalists and politicians, the heirloom rings and power lunch smiles. I'd been a reluctant spectator to it for 7 years of marriage, present, tolerated, but never truly welcomed. To them, I was the curious outsider, the one who didn't quite fit the mold. "I wasn't planning to do a tap dance on the tables," I said with a small smile I didn't feel. She didn't laugh. Vivian walked over to the dresser and opened a drawer, pulling out a tie. It was dull gray, plain. A tie so offensively unmemorable, it might as well have been designed to blend in with wallpaper. "Wear this," she said. "It's safe." I took the tie from her and stared at it. Safe. That word again. Safe meant quiet. It meant forgettable. It meant exactly how her family wanted me, muted and invisible. I wondered if her mother, Eloise, had picked it out. That woman had made no effort over the years to hide her disdain for me. From day one, she made it clear she had other plans for her daughter's life. Plans that didn't include a man raised in a working-class family from the South Shore. Even Vivian's sister, Danielle, all sharp cheekbones and sharper comments, never missed a chance to remind me that I was lucky to be part of their circle. She once joked over champagne, "It's so cute how you still work, Marcus." Like, real work. Then she and her trust fund friends cackled like it was the wittiest line of the decade. But I didn't react. I rarely did. That was my role in this orbit, to absorb and smile, to sip wine and nod like a background actor. As I held that gray tie, something in me shifted. Not snapped, not broke. Just moved slightly, like a door beginning to creak open after years of being stuck. I said nothing as Vivian walked away, humming under her breath, picking up the speech she was helping her father practice. I turned to the mirror, shirt still unbuttoned, tie in hand, face unreadable. What they didn't know, what Vivian didn't know, is that I had already been deeply involved in her father's company for over 3 years. Langston Medical Group, once a titan in healthcare innovation, had quietly begun to unravel. Poor acquisitions, outdated strategies, declining investor confidence, their stock was bleeding value, and Harold Langston, her father, was too proud to admit it, too proud to ask for help. That's where I came in, but not as myself. Through a network of holding companies and discrete equity channels, I'd orchestrated a silent buy-in. My firm, Reed Acquisitions, took controlling interest without Harold ever knowing the face behind the capital. I didn't need credit, I just needed control. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I saw an opportunity to preserve what Harold had built. For years, I kept my identity off every document. Not even my own team knew the full details. Now, with the retirement party days away and the final deal complete, I was set to meet Harold's longtime business partner, Graham Maddox. The man had insisted on shaking hands with the silent backer who had, in his words, saved the company's soul. Vivian had no idea. No one did. Because I never needed them to know, until now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Vivian, staring at the ceiling while she scrolled through her phone, liking posts from designer boutiques and celebrity chefs. I turned my head and looked at her, the woman I'd once chased through Central Park during a spontaneous summer trip, the woman I'd married on a rainy June afternoon. She was still beautiful, impossibly elegant, but somewhere along the way, the space between us had grown. I'd felt it in the little things, how she introduced me at dinners as just Marcus, how she never asked about my work, how she once corrected someone who called me a financier by saying, "Well, he dabbles." I didn't resent her, not entirely. I understood the pressure of her world, the unspoken expectations, the optics. She had been groomed for legacy, not love, and in their world, image often trumped truth. But something about that sentence, "Don't embarrass us," stuck to me like a thorn. Who is us? I wanted to ask. Is there a version of me you actually feel proud of, Vivian? Or am I just a polished accessory you keep in the corner, like a watch that doesn't quite go with the outfit but doesn't make enough noise to remove? As she drifted off to sleep, I rose quietly and walked into the study. I opened my laptop, pulled up the final acquisition documents, and reread the clause Graham had added last week. The new board will be announced following the retirement ceremony. Final approval pending public acknowledgement of incoming lead partner, Marcus Reed. So, it was set. My name would no longer be invisible. The clock glowed 2:17 a.m. I leaned back in my chair, the gray tie still draped over my wrist like a forgotten reminder. They wanted silence, but soon they'd hear the truth, not through a speech or confrontation, but through the kind of silence that reveals more than shouting ever could. I closed my laptop, walked back to bed, and finally slept. The morning after Vivian handed me that dull gray tie, I woke up to find it neatly draped over my side of the chair by the window. A silent reminder, a warning dressed as politeness. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the sunlight creep across the floorboards, and let my fingers run over the fabric. Smooth, stiff, utterly lifeless. I didn't wear it, not yet. Instead, I sat in silence, listening to the familiar rhythm of Vivian moving through the house, heels clicking across the hallway, the bathroom faucet running, the crisp snapping of her garment bag. She was always in control in the mornings, a perfectly choreographed routine. She didn't even notice that I hadn't gotten up yet. Or maybe she did but chose not to say anything. That was her version of grace-controlled indifference. I eventually wandered downstairs. She was already at the kitchen island, phone in one hand, a perfectly assembled smoothie in the other. She didn't look up when she spoke. Graham confirmed the final head count, just under 200. It's black tie, obviously, but Daddy wants the theme to feel modern retro, whatever that means. I gave a nod and poured myself a black coffee. I never had a taste for the green blend she drank. She always said coffee was a crutch. I thought it was a reminder, something about the warmth, the grounding. Vivian finally glanced at me, her eyes traveling over my plain navy shirt and slacks. "You're not wearing that to brunch, are you?" "We're having brunch," I asked, genuinely unsure. "We're having brunch?" I hadn't checked the calendar, and she hadn't mentioned it the night before. She sighed, tapping her phone. "With Danielle and Mom, remember? You promised." Of course, I always seemed to be promising things I didn't recall. I changed quickly, reluctantly reaching for the tie she'd picked. I held it up to the mirror again. That color, the lifeless gray, felt like a forecast, a prediction of who I was expected to be. Danielle's voice was the first thing I heard when we entered the restaurant lobby. She was perched at the table, sunglasses still on indoors, laughing far too loudly for a place that smelled of truffle oil and pretension. Beside her sat Eloise, regal and sharp-eyed in her signature ivory suit. She looked like she'd walked out of a courtroom and into a magazine shoot. Danielle spotted me and gave a mock clap. Well, he showed up. Mother, be kind. He's wearing the tie." Eloise barely smiled. "Color suits you, Marcus. It's understated," she said. "Like him," Danielle added, smirking over her mimosa. I gave a slight smile and took my seat. No one asked how I was. No one asked what I'd been working on. I could have closed $1 billion deal that morning, and they'd still want to know whether I'd remembered to make a dinner reservation at the steakhouse Vivian liked. Vivian leaned over and adjusted my collar mid-conversation. "Just straighten this a bit," she said, her voice soft but clipped, like a teacher correcting a child in front of classmates. That little gesture, so casual, so public, told me everything. I was a decoration, an accessory they hadn't chosen but tolerated, one they kept polishing, hoping someday I might shine the way they needed me to. Eloise turned to me midway through her salad and said, "Now, Marcus, remember, no need to speak at the event. Just let Harold and Graham handle everything. Your support is what matters." "I wasn't planning to speak," I replied. Danielle chuckled. "Well, thank goodness. The last thing we need is a TED Talk about spreadsheets and startup seed rounds." Vivian laughed lightly, not forced, but not entirely natural either. She wasn't cruel, just careful. She didn't want to draw a line between her family and me, but she also wasn't going to cross over to my side of it either. The rest of brunch was a blur of conversations I wasn't part of, about the event decor, the guest list, the flower arrangements. I nodded when expected, smiled when appropriate. Inside, I was somewhere else. I wasn't angry, not yet. I'd learned over the years to fold these little humiliations into myself like old receipts, crumpled, forgotten, but always there if you looked deep enough. I'd become a master of stillness, a student of silence. But something about that morning gnawed at me. It wasn't the tie, not really. It was the way they spoke around me, through me, like I was a mannequin they had to occasionally reposition for symmetry. Back home, Vivian spent the afternoon rehearsing Harold's retirement speech in the living room. She paced as she read from her notes, 40 years of excellence, a true pioneer, a man of vision and grace. I stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. She was good, polished. She cared deeply about the event, I could see that. This party wasn't just a celebration for her. It was a public passing of the torch, a final nod to the empire Harold had built. And maybe, in her mind, a subtle suggestion that she was the rightful heir, not through title, but through presence. She stopped when she noticed me watching. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You're good at that." "Thank you," she replied, a little surprised. She smiled. "Just don't go off script at the event, okay? That's all I ask." Off script. Like I was an actor in a play I didn't write. That night, as she drifted to sleep beside me, I sat in the study again. I opened the drawer and pulled out a different tie, one she didn't know I owned. Deep charcoal with a thin blue diagonal stripe. Not loud, not flashy, but not invisible either. I laid it next to the gray one on the desk. A question, a choice. I knew what she wanted, but for once, what I wanted mattered more. I had built an empire in silence, rescued a sinking company under layers of corporate camouflage. My name had been whispered in private circles, signed behind closed doors, hidden in acquisition memos, but I was done hiding. They wanted a man who wouldn't speak unless spoken to, who wouldn't exist unless introduced. But I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to the people who mattered, and soon, not to them either. There's something almost addictive about being the ghost in the machine. For 3 years, I moved through boardrooms and back channels without ever putting my name on a single press release. While others chased credit, I chased leverage. That was the difference. Most people want to be seen, I wanted to be effective. And nothing is more effective than silence when everyone else is shouting. It started with a quarterly report. Langston Medical Group's numbers had been declining for 5 consecutive quarters. From the outside, they blamed external pressures, regulatory hurdles, market saturation, pandemic aftershocks. But I saw something deeper: bad structure, outdated software, bloated leadership, poor integration strategies after 3 rushed acquisitions. It was a classic case of legacy arrogance. The company had grown too fast, too proud, and too lazy. I should have ignored it. I really should have. But Harold Langston was a symbol in Boston. He had built Langston Medical with a reputation for reliability, ethics, and long-term vision. And even though I knew he'd never respected me personally, I couldn't help but admire the empire he had once commanded. So, I stepped in, quietly. Reed Acquisitions, my firm, had long specialized in behind-the-scenes turnarounds. I built it that way on purpose. Shell corporations, holding companies, passive investor groups, we use them all. It's not shady, it's strategic. It keeps emotion out of the game. It keeps identity out of the headlines. And it gave me the room to restructure Langston Medical without the board ever realizing the new silent majority was a single source, me. It took 18 months to secure enough equity through controlled third parties. I had to outmaneuver 3 aggressive buyout firms and 1 European conglomerate. But piece by piece, the puzzle shifted. Voting rights changed hands, proxy seats rotated, and just like that, Langston Medical had a new lifeline. One that didn't wear a tie to their family dinners or speak at their galas, one they didn't even know existed. Harold kept showing up to work, assuming he was in charge. He wasn't. He was an avatar, a familiar face for shareholders, while we rewired the body from the inside out. It wasn't revenge, it was rescue. Graham Maddox was the first to notice. Graham had been Harold's business partner for nearly 3 decades. He wasn't flashy like Harold. He didn't love the spotlight or the accolades. He worked the numbers, the contracts, the people. If Harold was the head, Graham was the spine. And when the tide started shifting, Graham was smart enough to ask where the current was coming from. He reached out through a mutual connection, asked for a quiet meeting, said he didn't want names, just intent. He wasn't looking to stop the change, he just wanted to understand it, to know whether this new influence cared about preserving the Langston legacy or gutting it. We met in a quiet corner of a private club in Cambridge. I didn't hide who I was. I told him plainly, I'm not here to ruin the company, I'm here to fix it, quietly. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, took a sip of his whiskey, and said, I've watched Harold run this place into the ground for years, and no one had the guts to challenge him. If you're the man doing the saving, then you'll get my support. After that, Graham became my quiet ally. He helped guide the leadership shift internally, smoothing over the transitions, pushing key reforms, shielding us from unnecessary scrutiny. And when it came time to arrange Harold's retirement, he reached out again. He deserves a party, Graham said. He built something real once. Let him have that dignity. I agreed. No need to strip the man of his final bow. But I want to shake the hand of the man who saved it before the curtain drops, Graham added. At the event. Publicly. You've earned that much. I didn't answer right away. Truth was, I hadn't decided yet. Part of me still clung to the idea that if I just kept my head down, stayed quiet, I could avoid the awkwardness of revealing myself in front of people who had spent years dismissing me, people who thought I was just a stock picker, people who laughed at my ties, my silence, my lack of pedigree, people like my wife. But something about Graham's tone, it wasn't pushy, it was respectful. It was as if he was saying, let them know. Not for revenge, for clarity. It stayed with me. Later that week, I stood at the window of my office, watching the Boston skyline stretch wide under a slate-colored sky. Behind me, my assistant, Lydia, updated me on the final merger of our oncology tech arm. I nodded along, offered input, signed documents, but my mind kept drifting to that party, to that ballroom, to that tie. I wondered how Vivian would react. I wondered if she'd try to stop it, or worse, pretend like she knew all along. Vivian didn't like being caught off guard. She preferred control, narratives she could shape, photos she could caption. A surprise acknowledgement of my power at her father's retirement party, that would ruin her rhythm. But I wasn't doing this for her, or for Harold, or Eloise, or Danielle. I was doing it for me. Because for once, I didn't want to be the man behind the curtain. I wanted to stand in the room. Not to shout, not to gloat, but simply to exist fully in the truth. When Graham called me the next day to confirm the guest list, he asked again gently, "Will you let me introduce you?" I took a breath. "Yes," I said. "It's time." That night, I sat alone in the study, staring at the finalized documents, the board transition, the executive restructuring, the new vision statement. My signature was at the bottom of every page. No more initials, no more proxies, just Marcus Reed. The man they tried to hide, but not for much longer. The night of the retirement party arrived like a quiet drum roll in my chest. From the moment I opened my eyes that morning, I knew the rhythm of the day would be different. I moved through it slowly, deliberately, like I was pulling on layers of armor instead of clothes. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to feel every moment. This wasn't just another dinner or another stiff social event. It was a shift, a reckoning, silent and overdue. Vivian was flawless, as always. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, adjusting her pearl earrings with a grace that felt almost mechanical. Her hair was swept up in a style I'd only ever seen reserved for magazine covers. Her dress was silver and sharp, hugging every line like it had been sewn into her skin. I watched her from the corner of the room. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't need to. She assumed everything was as it should be, that I'd follow quietly behind her, like I always did. She turned to grab her clutch and noticed me, still sitting on the edge of the bed, knotting my tie slowly. Her eyes fell on it, not the gray one she picked. It was deep charcoal, just like the one I laid out a few nights ago, with a subtle diagonal stripe that caught the light if you tilted your head. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't invisible either. She blinked once, then smiled tightly. "That's not the tie I left out for you," she said. "I know," I replied, still knotting it with calm hands. Her smile held, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said nothing, just slipped on her heels and walked to the door. On the drive to the venue, silence stretched between us like a pane of glass, clear, cold, ready to shatter at any second. She stared out the window most of the time, probably rehearsing lines in her head, probably making lists of people she needed to greet, tables she needed to visit, compliments she needed to give. Image was her language, approval was her currency. When we arrived, I stepped out first and held the door for her. Flashbulbs popped, even though it wasn't a red carpet. In her family's world, everything had a lens on it. She smiled at the cameras with a practiced poise, then walked ahead without waiting for me. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, ivory linen-draped tables, tall glass vases filled with white orchids. A jazz trio played in the corner. Waiters glided by with champagne flutes and trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was a celebration, no doubt, but not one of warmth. It was elegance dressed in ice. The guest list read like a corporate yearbook. Executives, doctors, political figures, investment brokers, even a few celebrity donors to Harold's Hospital Foundation. And yet, in the middle of it all, I stood at the fringe, a shadow in my own clothes. I watched as Vivian glided from table to table, kissing cheeks, laughing politely, performing her role with flawless precision. She looked back at me once, as if checking that I wasn't wandering too far or saying too much. I gave her a nod. She didn't smile, just turned back to her audience. At the far end of the room, I spotted Eloise, tall, stern, and statuesque in navy. She was in a circle of women, all dressed in variations of money. They held champagne glasses like accessories, laughing with the same rehearsed pitch. Then I saw it. Eloise pointing at me discreetly. The women leaned in, smiles curled at the corners of their mouths like secrets. One woman raised an eyebrow and whispered something that made the others smirk. They laughed, all of them. Delicate, polished, cruel laughter. I didn't flinch. Across the room, Danielle waved a lazy hand at me, as if I were a valet or a distant cousin. I nodded and began to walk away, toward the back, toward the bar, toward somewhere I didn't have to pretend. But before I could reach it, I heard a voice behind me. Marcus. It was Vivian. She caught up quickly, her heels silent against the marble floor. She touched my arm lightly. "Could you maybe just hang near the bar area for a bit?" she said, her voice gentle but rehearsed. "It's getting a little crowded by the sponsors. I don't want you to feel out of place." I stared at her for a second longer than I should have. "Do I look out of place?" She hesitated. "No, I just mean, with all the medical talk and policy guests, it's easy to feel out of the loop." "Out of the loop," I repeated. I nodded once. "I'll be fine." She smiled, relieved, then disappeared again. I stood at the edge of the room, fingers wrapped around a whiskey glass, heart beating, not from nerves but from clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I had known this version of the night was coming. I had felt it in the way Vivian avoided asking me about the company, in the way she flinched every time I introduced myself to someone she hadn't briefed first. To her, I wasn't her equal. I was her footnote. But not to Graham, not to the board, not anymore. Then the doors opened again. A hush moved through the room, not silence, but something close. An air shift, a subtle change in temperature. Conversation slowed, heads turned. Graham Maddox had arrived. He didn't walk, he moved like a man on rails. Steady, respected, impossible to ignore. People instinctively moved out of his way, drifting toward him like metal to a magnet. Even Harold, who had been laughing loudly at the center table, paused mid-sentence. Graham wore a sharp black suit, his silver hair slicked back in his usual no-nonsense style. He greeted a few people, nodded to others, but his eyes were scanning the room, searching. Then he found me. Our eyes locked across the ballroom, and he smiled. Not a nod, not a passing glance, a full, clear, deliberate smile. He began walking directly toward me, no hesitation, no detours, just a slow, purposeful approach that caught the attention of everyone in his path. Conversation stopped completely now. I could feel the silence pool around us. Vivian turned. She saw him coming. Her smile began to falter. Then she looked to where he was heading. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Graham stopped in front of me, extended his hand. His voice rang out, calm, deep, firm. "Good to see you, sir." "Sir." The word echoed like a dropped pin in a cathedral. He gripped my hand tightly, with warmth and respect, like two men who had stood on the same battlefield and come out the other side. "Everyone," Graham said, his voice raised just enough to carry, "this is Marcus Reed, the man who made this night possible." I felt the heat of 200 stares, but I didn't flinch. I stood tall. I met their silence with certainty. Because I was no longer the man in the background. I was the storm they didn't see coming. There's a certain sound that rooms make when truth cuts through them. It's not loud. It's not even a sound you can describe. But you feel it. A stillness, a pause, a held breath. The quiet ripple that comes when people realize the story they thought they knew was never the real one. That was the sound I heard when Graham Maddox said my name out loud. Not just the name, the recognition behind it, the reverence in his tone, and most of all, the weight of what followed. This is Marcus Reed, the man who made this night possible. He could have dropped a chandelier and gotten less of a reaction. People froze mid-sip, mid-sentence, mid-smile. Vivian stopped walking, her heels catching slightly on the carpet as she turned. Her eyes locked on to Graham, then to me, like she was trying to rewind and replay what she had just heard. Her father, Harold, standing across the room in front of the donor table, blinked in confusion. His mouth opened slightly as he turned to look. I watched his chest rise and fall just once, then still. Eloise's glass tilted dangerously in her hand. Danielle muttered something to the woman next to her, who immediately leaned in to whisper back, eyes flicking toward me like I was an exhibit. But I wasn't looking at them, not anymore. I looked at Graham. He held my hand firmly, then placed his left hand on top of mine like a seal. He was smiling, not just politely, but genuinely, proud even. And loud enough for everyone to hear, he added. Without Marcus, Langston Medical would have folded 2 years ago. But you didn't know that, did you? The silence around us deepened. You could hear forks being set down, champagne bubbling, but no one spoke. He turned slightly toward Harold. You remember those anonymous investors we partnered with to restructure the company? The ones who kept us afloat during the supply chain collapse? The ones who proposed the pivot to digital health? That wasn't some hedge fund. That was Marcus Reed. I gave a small nod, offering my hand to Harold. Pleasure to finally meet you, sir. Harold looked like he'd been blindsided by a headwind. Slowly, he reached out and shook my hand. His grip was weak, not because he didn't want to shake it, but because his mind was still catching up to the new picture in front of him. You, he began, his voice soft, eyes narrowing slightly. You were behind the entire restructuring? Yes, I replied calmly. From the start. Vivian approached then, cautiously, not with her usual grace but with a tentative edge I hadn't seen before. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and fragile composure. She stepped beside her father and placed a hand lightly on his arm. I didn't know, she said softly, to no one in particular. Graham chuckled. No one did. That was the point. Marcus didn't need the spotlight, he needed results. And he delivered. He turned toward the rest of the room then, like a conductor guiding the audience back from shock. So tonight, while we honor Harold's legacy, and rightly so, let's not forget the man who ensured there'd be a legacy left to celebrate. A ripple of murmurs followed, hesitant claps, some nods. A few people started whispering names, trying to connect dots. I caught glimpses of surprise from across the room, some faces frowning in confusion, others blinking in rapid realization. One man near the bar raised his glass toward me with a knowing grin. Danielle was whispering furiously to her husband, who looked like he'd been handed a tax audit. Eloise hadn't moved. Vivian turned to me, her voice low, brittle. You never told me. You never asked, I said, my voice soft but clear. She flinched slightly, and I could see the words forming behind her eyes, anger, embarrassment, maybe regret. But she didn't speak them. Instead, she stepped back, letting Harold take center stage. He cleared his throat, lifting a champagne glass from the nearby table. I suppose, he said with a shaky smile, this night's had a few surprises. That broke the tension. The room chuckled gently, collectively exhaling. Relief, confusion, admiration, all tangled in the air like perfume and candle smoke. He gestured to Graham. Thank you for that passionate introduction, and thank you, Marcus, for everything you've done behind the scenes. It's true, Langston Medical was heading into a storm, and someone pulled the wheel just in time. He raised his glass. To legacies, both built and rebuilt. The crowd toasted, and just like that, the room began to shift again, slowly, carefully. People resumed conversations, though now with a new topic. I felt their eyes drift toward me more frequently. This time not with disdain, but with curiosity, with recalibration. Suddenly, I wasn't a footnote in Vivian's story. I was a headline in their reality. Vivian lingered beside me for a moment longer. She didn't say anything, just stared at my face like she was seeing it for the first time. Not the version she had sculpted over 7 years, but the man she never really looked at. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't need to. I just existed, fully, finally. One of Harold's old colleagues came over. Mr. Reed, I had no idea, he said, offering a firm handshake. Brilliant work, brilliant. We all thought Graham had brought in some private European investors. Just a small firm, I replied humbly. Right place, right time. But the strategy, the pivot into remote diagnostics, that was you? Collaborative effort, I said. Graham and I worked closely. I wasn't interested in the applause, but I didn't shy away from it either, not anymore. As the evening wore on, more people came to speak, some out of genuine respect, others out of opportunism, now aware of the influence I held. It didn't matter. They were seeing me now, and I had nothing to hide. At one point I found myself near the bar again, a moment to breathe, a moment to think. Vivian approached, her expression softer than before, vulnerable even. You changed everything, she said. I didn't change, I replied. I just stopped hiding. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then back to mine. I never meant to dismiss you, Marcus. I thought I understood what this world expected. I thought I was protecting us. You weren't protecting me, I said. You were managing me. She winced. So, what now? I looked out across the ballroom, at the people laughing, the champagne flowing, the string quartet playing its careful tune. I don't know, I said, but I'm not going back to silence. Then I walked away, not angry, not triumphant, just free. Because in that moment, I wasn't just the man behind the curtain anymore. I was the man they tried to hide, and now there was no hiding left. Dead silence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the absence of everything. No buzzing phones, no clinking glasses, no background chatter, just space. Tight, charged, suffocating space. That's what settled over the room after Graham spoke. Everyone, this is Mr. Marcus Reed. Without him, Langston Medical wouldn't be here tonight. It was like someone hit pause on the entire evening. Not a soul moved. I could see it in their faces, the slow dawning, the mental rewinding. the scrambling to reassess everything they thought they knew. I wasn't the man sipping quietly in the corner anymore. I wasn't the plus one with a decent suit and a forgettable tie. No, now I was someone important. Now I was the reason this celebration was even happening. Vivian looked like her mind had stepped out of the room and hadn't come back yet. Her lips were slightly parted. Her fingers still rested gently on her father's arm, frozen mid-motion, like a movie paused in the middle of a line. Eloise had turned a shade paler than I'd ever seen her. She gripped her clutch tightly against her hip, lips pressed in a line so thin they almost disappeared. Danielle was whispering again, now faster, more panicked, like someone trying to plug a leak with a paper towel. But no one said a word to me directly. They couldn't, not yet. Graham's words were still sinking in, like ink on linen, permanent, unexpected, a truth they weren't ready for. I nodded politely toward Harold. "Pleasure to finally meet you, sir." He managed a delayed nod, eyes still fixed on me like I was a mirage. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Graham placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "This is the man who kept your name from disappearing off hospital wings," he said calmly. "Might be time you learned that." Harold didn't argue. To his credit, he didn't snap or lash out or reach for a joke to cover the tension. He simply nodded again, slower this time, then turned to his wife and daughter, like he needed them to confirm that, yes, this was real. Vivian didn't move. I didn't expect her to, not yet. I turned away slowly, stepping to the side so Graham could take the floor and continue with the event's formal remarks. He transitioned the crowd gently, giving them something to latch onto: numbers, vision, legacy. It was a masterclass in social CPR, reviving the room with the same hands that had dropped the heart-stopping truth just moments before. But even as the crowd resumed their rhythm, their eyes stayed on me, some curious, some stunned, some skeptical, all of them different than before. I didn't walk away or try to hide. I stayed right where I was, sipping my drink, back straight, shoulders relaxed, the same Marcus Reed as always, but now seen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Vivian whisper something to Harold. He nodded slowly and walked toward the stage, a new stiffness in his step. Vivian hesitated a moment longer before following him. I stayed where I was. I didn't go after her. I wanted her to come to me, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She didn't, not yet. Instead, I turned to find a new face beside me, a woman in her 50s, striking in a navy dress with the kind of posture that said she was used to being listened to. "Mr. Reed," she said, offering a hand. "I'm Dr. Ellen Robarts. We met briefly at the Midtown Health Summit, though you were still anonymous then." I shook her hand. "I remember. You were leading the panel on surgical tech expansion." She smiled. "So, you weren't just eavesdropping. You were actually paying attention." "I like to listen more than I speak," I said with a half smile, though apparently not anymore. She laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. "Well, I'll say this, you've made an impression tonight. The right kind." More people approached after that, slowly at first, then steadily, CEOs, consultants, board members I'd once only known through reports and indirect memos. They asked smart questions. They congratulated me. A few offered guarded compliments, the kind that let you know they'd underestimated you but were too proud to admit it. And still, from across the room, I could feel Vivian's eyes watching me. Finally, she approached. I could hear the hesitation in her steps, the kind of careful walk someone takes when approaching a cliff they never realized was there until they were standing on the edge. "Marcus," she said softly. I turned to her. She looked radiant, as always, but now her poise was cracking at the edges, not visibly, but enough that I could feel it. "You knew this whole time?" she asked. "I did. You let us all believe you were just the quiet husband with the tie you picked out," I offered gently. She looked down, embarrassed. "You could have told me. You never asked." Silence again. Not the stunned kind this time, the personal kind, the kind that wraps around a conversation like a curtain, reminding you that there are some things only two people in a room can understand. "I wasn't trying to deceive you, Vivian," I said. "I just didn't think you were interested." She looked up. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's true." Her eyes brimmed with questions she wasn't ready to ask, or maybe with realizations she wasn't ready to accept. "You made me feel small," I said simply. "Every dinner, every brunch, every time you introduced me as just Marcus." "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "From what?" She didn't answer, and I didn't press. Because the truth was obvious, she wasn't protecting me. She was protecting the image, the story her family liked to tell. And I didn't fit the narrative, not until now. "I'm not angry," I said finally, "just done pretending." Vivian nodded slowly, as if her entire past few years were rewinding in her mind. Every dismissive comment, every sideways glance, every time she asked me not to speak unless spoken to. "You were never invisible," she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't reply, because she was wrong. I was invisible, until now. That night, as the event wound down and people began gathering their coats and gift bags, I stayed by the exit, thanking those who stopped to shake my hand. Eloise avoided me entirely. Danielle gave a brief, stiff nod and disappeared into a corner conversation. Harold offered a final handshake that felt more respectful than warm, but that was enough. And Vivian? She stood alone for a long time, watching me from near the center of the room, her eyes tired, her jaw set. She looked like someone who had just woken up in a different world than the one she went to sleep in, a world where her husband wasn't an accessory, a world where he was the foundation, and the room finally knew it. When the music finally faded and the crowd began thinning out, I didn't move from my spot near the ballroom doors. I stood there, drinking, exchanging nods and handshakes with people who would have walked past me an hour earlier without a second glance. Funny how truth, when finally spoken, rearranges the room. Graham had gone, Harold too, after a long, awkward thank you speech where he tried to strike a balance between gratitude and confusion. You could tell he was still processing everything, not just what I had done for the company, but who I was, who I had always been. Vivian lingered. She hadn't spoken to me again since our earlier conversation, not directly. I watched her speak to guests with her signature polish, but her eyes were different now, quieter, heavier. She wasn't performing anymore. She was observing, recalculating. I wasn't angry. Honestly, I felt light, like I'd spent years carrying a mask I didn't need, and now that it was gone, the weight had vanished with it. That mask, that quiet, agreeable sit-in-the-corner Marcus, wasn't me. It never had been. But it was the version Vivian liked best, the version her mother tolerated, the version her sister mocked. Not anymore. I was the strategist, the investor, the architect behind the deals that saved their name. Now, standing under the soft light of crystal chandeliers, I wasn't hiding anymore. And the world wasn't ignoring me anymore either. As I reached for my coat, I heard a voice behind me. Mr. Reed, a moment. I turned. It was a man in his 40s, sharp suit, familiar face. One of the tech consultants Langston had hired back during the restructuring phase. He extended his hand. I just wanted to say your moves were surgical. Brilliant. I studied those quarterly reports, and now, knowing it was you behind them. He shook his head with genuine admiration. You could have been a public name easily. I smiled. Calm. Being public isn't always the goal. He nodded, understanding. Still, respect. We parted with a firm handshake and I stepped out into the crisp Boston night. The air smelled of early spring and cigarette smoke from the valet stand. I stood on the steps for a moment watching as people piled into black cars and limousines, chatting, laughing, gossiping. Behind me, the ballroom buzzed with the slow unraveling of a party that would be talked about for months, mostly because of me. I didn't plan that, I didn't need it. But I accepted it. Just as I was about to call for my car, I heard her voice. Marcus, Vivian. She was still in her silver gown, but it looked heavier now. Her earrings sparkled, but her expression was bare. I wasn't ready, she said quietly, stepping beside me. Not for any of that. I didn't respond. I just waited. You never told me, not once. Not even when I made those comments at dinners with my family. You didn't ask, I said, my tone not sharp, just honest. I didn't think I had to, she said. I assumed. She trailed off. You assumed I was comfortable being in your shadow, I replied. You liked me quiet, convenient, safe. She flinched. You were never just a stock guy to me, Marcus. I mean, yes, I didn't understand the details, but I respected your work. No, I said. You respected the parts that didn't threaten your family's image. That stopped her. You introduced me as just Marcus for years. You corrected people when they assumed I was in finance. You told me days ago not to embarrass you. I looked at her then, really looked, but I wasn't the one pretending. Her eyes glistened now, not with tears, not quite, but with realization. You made me question everything tonight, she said. Not just who you are, but who I've been. I nodded slowly. That's what truth does. There was silence between us, but not the kind from earlier. This was intimate, sad, complicated. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, that I was shielding you from their judgments. You weren't, I said gently. You were shielding them from the discomfort of seeing you with someone they couldn't label, someone they didn't pick. She wiped the corner of her eye. You deserve better than how I treated you. I know, I said. I just thought, if I could keep everything polished, perfect, then it would all stay safe. That word again, I said. She laughed bitterly. I guess I used it like a shield. She paused, more like a muzzle. That silenced her, not out of offense, but understanding. I don't want to lose you, she said after a long pause. I think you already did, I replied. We stood there in silence again, under the night sky, with the last of the guests stepping into cars behind us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't set you up, I told her. I didn't plan any of this to hurt you. She nodded slowly. I know. You just stopped hiding. There was nothing more to say after that. She turned and walked back inside without a word, and I watched her go, graceful, elegant, deeply human. Not the villain, not the victim. Just someone who couldn't see what was in front of her until it was too late. I walked to my car alone. No driver, no fanfare, just me in the quiet. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a background character. I felt like a man who had finally stepped into his own story, not with noise, not with anger, but with the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. The ride home was silent. Vivian sat beside me in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed out the window. The gown she wore no longer glimmered. It sagged around her like a costume she forgot to take off. I kept both hands on the wheel, focused on the dark road ahead. The engine was the only sound between us, humming low and even, like it was trying not to disturb the fragile tension sitting between us. We hadn't spoken since she turned back into the ballroom. I had assumed she'd catch a ride with her parents, maybe stay the night at the Langston estate like she often did after large events, but she didn't. When I walked out to the car, she was already standing next to the passenger side door, waiting, quiet. So I unlocked it and we left together. But we weren't together, not really. She hadn't said a word since she buckled her seatbelt. Neither had I. But I could feel the weight of her thoughts bouncing around the car like loose change in a glove compartment. Regret, shame, maybe confusion, maybe trying to figure out how she could spin this story into something cleaner, something she could still control. But she couldn't, not anymore. And I wasn't going to help her this time. I pulled into the driveway just before midnight. The porch light was still on, casting long shadows across the garden she had hired someone else to plant. Everything about our house was curated, coordinated, just like her. It had never really been mine. I had paid the mortgage, signed the deed, but it had always felt like walking through a showroom, beautiful, quiet, cold. We sat there for a few more seconds, then I shut off the engine and stepped out. The air was colder than I expected. I heard her car door open a moment later. We walked to the door together, but not side by side. We moved like two strangers who happened to live under the same roof. Inside, she slipped off her heels by the entryway and went straight to the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, then close. She poured water into a glass, drank half, set it down. I walked past her, heading for the stairs. "Marcus," she said behind me. I stopped. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I turned slowly. She was standing by the island, arms crossed, barefoot, gown shimmering faintly in the kitchen light. She looked unsure, something I hadn't seen from her since the first time we danced at our wedding. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked. She hesitated. "Everything." I leaned against the stair railing. "That's a lot." "I know," she whispered. "But I don't want to go to bed pretending like none of it happened." I looked at her, really looked at her. No anger, no distance, just the raw truth that neither of us could escape anymore. "Then say what you need to say." She nodded, took a breath, and walked to the living room. I followed, sitting across from her, not beside her, on the opposite couch. She pulled a blanket around her legs, not because she was cold, but because she was exposed. "I didn't know how much I was silencing you," she said. "I thought I was helping you blend in, protecting you from how cruel my family can be." "They didn't need your help with that," I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I'm not proud of the way I treated you, or the way I let them treat you. Her voice broke slightly. "I got used to the story I told myself. That you didn't mind being in the background, that you liked being quiet." "I like being quiet," I said, "but I don't like being erased." Vivian's face twisted with guilt. "You never were to me, not in my heart." "Maybe not in your heart," I said, "but everywhere else I disappeared. In every photo, in every introduction, in every time you said just Marcus. I wasn't your partner, I was a placeholder." She didn't defend herself. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. "You made me small," I continued, "and I let you. That's on me too. I didn't fight back. I thought if I stayed steady, stayed supportive, eventually you'd see me. Really see me." Vivian looked down, tears threatening. "I see you now." I nodded slowly. It took a crowd of strangers and a mic drop from Graham Maddox for that to happen. She looked up again, her voice barely a whisper. "Are we done?" "I don't know," I said, honestly. "But I know I'm done pretending. I won't shrink myself to make other people feel comfortable, not even for you." She reached forward instinctively, as if trying to close the space between us, but her hand stopped halfway, unsure of what she was reaching for. I stood. "I need sleep," I said. She nodded, eyes wet. I walked upstairs. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. Just like the party, I didn't need volume to make my point. That night, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of Vivian moving around downstairs fading into stillness. At some point, the house went quiet. Not just silent, empty, but peaceful too, like the air had cleared, like the masks had been hung up for good. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen table. "Let's talk. We need to figure out who we really are. Vivian." I read it once, then again, and then I placed it down. I didn't want apologies written on fine stationery. I didn't want a heart-to-heart scripted over coffee. I wanted something real. I wanted respect, not recovery. So, I made my choice. I showered, I got dressed, I brewed coffee, and then I drove to my office. There, waiting on my desk, was a letter from Graham. Inside was the formal board invitation. "We believe your vision should help lead us forward. Welcome." I signed it, not because I needed power, but because I finally stopped hiding from it. The morning after the party, the city was unusually still. It was one of those rare Boston days when the sky hung low and quiet, coated in a dull silver fog that seemed to mute the entire world. I sat in my office, staring at the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, holding the note Vivian had left on the kitchen table. "Let's talk. We need to figure out who we really are." Vivian. I'd read it 3 times before I folded it and placed it gently in the drawer beside my keyboard. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the gesture. It just came too late, and from the wrong place. The letter was an act of damage control, a response to exposure, but not the kind of reckoning that I needed. Not anymore. I had spent too many years hoping for words like that, a simple acknowledgement, a sentence that told me I was seen. But now that I had it, I didn't feel relief. I felt tired. Tired of being polite when I was being belittled. Tired of playing humble to make others feel secure. Tired of shrinking just to fit into a frame someone else built for me. And maybe, more than anything, I was tired of pretending that all of it was normal. I turned to the letter that did matter, the one from Graham, sealed in a navy blue envelope with the Langston medical insignia pressed in silver. Inside were the finalized terms of my appointment to the board: permanent, voting, full rights, full access. A seat at the table I'd built from underneath. I signed without hesitation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. A presence no one could deny now, no matter how quiet I chose to be. By noon, I was deep in work, coordinating with my legal team about the transfer of a few subsidiary holdings. My firm had grown significantly in the last year. We were no longer just a silent force in acquisitions. We were evolving into architects of entire sectors. I had a vision, and I was ready to live it out loud. I didn't check my phone until after lunch. 10 missed messages, all from Vivian. Some long, some short, some that began with "I need to explain," and others that simply said "please." I scrolled through them, not out of spite, but with the same curiosity you might have flipping through a diary from a time in your life that felt foreign now. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought I would be, but I wasn't, not even bitter. I had expected fury. What I found was peace. Because when the mask drops, when the world finally sees you without filter or filtration, you don't need anyone else's validation. You just need your own. Still, I owed her a response. Maybe not the one she wanted, but one rooted in honesty. I typed, "Vivian, you asked me not to embarrass you. I didn't. I revealed who I've always been, Marcus." Then I put my phone down and went back to work. That evening, I returned home briefly to pack an overnight bag. I wasn't leaving in some grand theatrical way. I just needed space. I needed a room where I wasn't haunted by echoes of smallness, a place where the walls didn't remember all the times I'd been asked to stay quiet or wear a dull gray tie. Vivian wasn't home. Her car was gone, probably with her mother or her sister, maybe with someone new, trying to help her rewrite the narrative into something cleaner. I didn't mind. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and saw it, still hanging there, the gray tie, unworn, untouched. I took it down, folded it slowly, and placed it inside a drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of how easy it is to become someone else's silence if you're not careful. I took only what I needed: some clothes, my watch, a notebook. No drama, no slammed doors, just quiet footsteps and a hotel key in my pocket. By nightfall, I was in a suite downtown with a skyline view, a whiskey in my hand, and my laptop open. I sent emails, scheduled meetings, finalized my next move. I was done being the invisible man, and I was done waiting for the world to notice me. Now they had. The next morning, I met with Graham for breakfast at his favorite spot, a quiet, upscale cafe tucked into a side street near Beacon Hill. He was already seated, reading the paper, suit perfect as always. "You good?" he asked as I sat down. I nodded. Better than I've been in years. He smiled. You've handled all of this with more grace than most men would. Hell, I've seen CEOs crumble under less. I had a lot of practice being ignored, I said lightly. He folded the paper. They know now, everyone, and they won't forget it. I don't need them to remember me, I said, sipping my coffee. I just needed them to stop writing me out of my own story. He tapped the table gently. Well, the story is yours now. So what's next? I didn't answer right away because I didn't fully know. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't terrify me. I said slowly, I just want to build something real, without apology, without needing to explain it to anyone who doesn't want to understand. Graham nodded, like a man who understood exactly what that meant. We talked business for the next hour, mergers, market shifts, internal politics. But underneath it all was something deeper, a respect I hadn't felt in years. Not the kind of approval that comes from being useful, but the kind that comes from being seen. After we parted ways, I walked through the city for a while, letting the cool air wrap around me. I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel lost. I felt new. And somewhere between the second coffee shop and the corner bookstore, I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her, not for them, not even for closure. I was already living in it. Exactly 1 week after the retirement party, I stood by the window in my new office. Top floor, corner view, sun cutting across the skyline like a slow golden blade. My name was etched on the glass door outside. Marcus Reed, founder and managing partner, Reed Acquisitions. Not in bold, not in gold, not screaming for attention, just there, firm, permanent. Behind me, my team celebrated. We had just finalized the acquisition of a rising diagnostics company in North Carolina, one that specialized in early-stage cancer detection using AI. It was more than a good deal. It was the kind of work that meant something. They brought in cupcakes, popped open a bottle of champagne I didn't know we had in the fridge, and toasted to the next chapter. I smiled, clapped, gave a few words. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't mention the party. There was no need. They weren't clapping for my past, they were clapping for where we were headed. It felt good. Not flashy, not loud, just real. I turned back to the window while they laughed and toasted behind me. The city stretched wide below. Familiar, honest, complex. I had spent years watching it from other people's rooms, ballrooms, parlors, conference centers, always standing near the edge, just out of focus. Now I was the center of my own frame. No handlers, no introductions with downplayed titles, no wife pulling me by the wrist with a smile that said, just don't talk too much. I was finally here, just me, unmasked, unapologetic. Halfway through the celebration, my phone buzzed. Vivian, again. She hadn't stopped texting. Not angry messages anymore, they had shifted into something more erratic, confused, wounded, regretful. Some short, can we please talk? Others longer, I didn't know how blind I was. I see it now. I see you. I read them all, but I only responded once. I had sent it a few days ago, during a late night in the hotel, when I looked out at the Charles River and realized I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Vivian, you asked me not to embarrass you. I didn't. I revealed who I've always been. She hadn't replied to that. Today, her name flashed again. This time, I didn't open the message. I simply turned the phone over, face down, and let it rest beside the tray of untouched cupcakes. Across the room, Lydia, my assistant, walked over and handed me a slim envelope from Graham. Hand-delivered this morning, she said. Said you'd know what it meant. I nodded and took it. Inside was a photograph. It was taken at the retirement party. I hadn't known there were any cameras pointed at me that night, but Graham must have arranged it. In the picture, I stood by the bar, hand extended as Graham greeted me. He was mid-sentence, his mouth slightly open, and I was listening, calm, still, poised. And behind me, just out of focus, were the stunned faces of Vivian, Harold, and Eloise, the moment of unmasking, frozen forever. I looked at it for a long time before tucking it inside the drawer beneath my desk, not to display, just to remember. It wasn't about showing them, it was about reminding me. I took the rest of the day slow, spoke to the team, laughed a little, shared coffee with new interns who reminded me of myself, observant, serious, full of questions. I didn't tell them my story, I didn't need to. What mattered was the space we were building together, a space where no one was asked to shrink. That evening, I returned to the house. Yes, that house, the one that had never felt entirely mine. Vivian wasn't home. Her car was gone again, whether she was with family or retreating somewhere to think. I didn't know. I didn't ask. I had come for one reason, closure. I walked through the rooms slowly. The living room still held the scent of old candles and polished furniture. The walls were covered in framed photos, family dinners, holidays, foundation galas, most of them staged, most of them curated. I paused at one of them. A photo from our second anniversary. She stood in front, laughing, wine glass raised. I was in the back, barely visible, talking to a waiter, adjusting my cufflink. That was the role I played for years, the background, the husband who never quite matched the rest of the decor. I didn't hate her for it. I hated that I'd let myself play the part of me that thought being loved meant being less. Before I left, I stood in the closet. That gray tie still sat, folded, in the drawer. I picked it up once more, then dropped it gently into the donation bag. There were no angry goodbyes, no slammed doors, no theatrical messages scribbled onto mirrors, just me, walking out with my own key, locking it one last time, and leaving behind the version of myself I would never be again. Back at my apartment, the one I'd chosen myself, with dark wood floors and bookshelves that reached the ceiling, I opened a bottle of red wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city was alive again, not chaotic, just awake. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a man trying to prove anything. I didn't feel like a man waiting to be seen. I felt like a man who had arrived, fully, completely, quietly. Vivian's last message came 2 days later. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need endings tied with a bow. Some stories end with a step, a choice, a door closed softly behind you, and the sound of your own voice finally unmuted saying, "This is who I am."